Last intro, you can do this one. I haven't a clue where we're going, but
hopefully we're not going anywhere from this room. We'll be on a journey. Hey guys, welcome to another podcast. And we were just talking, as going through an adjustment here, about intolerances and the way things show up in our body. Been some interesting discussions going on. And this is kind of stemmed from this week. I got glutened.
Glutened.
Yeah. I don't think that's actually in the Oxford English Dictionary.
It should be. It's a good
Glutened.
phrase. Glutened.
When you accidentally have gluten. And I'm very sensitive to gluten. I'm not celiac, but if I have gluten and I'm a little bit more stressed, it shows up usually as I get a migraine. And it's my birthday, Friday, another year older.
Nachos? Do you have nachos?
I didn't. That's another thing we can talk about, because I haven't had nachos since I last had a migraine before. And so we were talking about the last time I had a migraine was over 2 years ago, and I had 5 in a week after I went to New York, had loads of nachos, had some gluten, and it all accumulated into a really bad migraine. I had 5 in the week, and then the Friday I actually came here.
I remember that.
I had sunglasses on.
Yeah, you weren't in a good way.
No, it was horrible. But this Friday happened, and Saturday I was walking around Sainsbury's, and then there were other supermarkets out there. No favoritism. I was walking around Sainsbury's, and then suddenly my eyes just started just closing in. And if anyone has migraines, then they'll know what I mean with that. And I don't actually get a headache as a sign of it. Yeah. But I get the eyes, the aura's going on, I get blind spots in my eyes, and then I couldn't feel my hand, and just suddenly loads of fatigue. The headache for me comes afterwards, where I bend down. And this made me think a bit deeper about what actually goes on with our body, and then how not being aligned shows up.
Well, see, I'm not a headache sufferer, so I've never had what people would describe as a classic migraine. Obviously, we see it a lot with patients and the clinical side of it. I have family members who have migraines. So I understand that, but never physically have gone through that process. And it's always interesting for many people who don't, and there will be people now on the podcast not relating, going, how can you get all those symptoms? How can you get all that just from eating a bit of food or something which is gluten in, which they eat all the time and don't react to? It's really quite an interesting thing of how we talk along when the body reacts, or it's under there's interference into the nervous system, which is obvious from a migraine headache, of physical, emotional and chemical. And when it comes to chemical, a lot of people, they understand a bit of emotional stress. They understand that, physically perhaps the neck might give them a headache, but they don't. It's hard for them to understand chemical, or how much of a chemical reaction or stress onto the system can result in a strong neurological, I think, from something where some people eat, anything with gluten and not react at all. So it's very interesting of how...
It's interesting how it does show up. Like with me, I'm not always... if I had gluten and I'm not stressed, be fine. Yeah. And there were some other things going on that I was a little bit more stressed. But then, the knock-on effect of that, of getting that migraine, and then Sunday, so I had a British barbecue under an umbrella for my birthday, and then one of my dogs got a kebab skewer, as I said about. And luckily he didn't chew it. He managed to swallow the kebab skewer whole. And it was a vegetarian kebab as well, so I'm thinking he was pretty disappointed. He managed to throw up all the stuff that was on there, but the stick was still there.
But not the stick.
Not the stick. So we had to call the
wrong way around.
Yeah, exactly. We had to call the vets. We had to go to the emergency vets, and he had to be knocked out, camera down his throat to pull the stick out. But as a result, what I'm getting to here is that then threw my routine out when we talk about circadian rhythm and how important it is to have a rhythm of consistency in the body. And then as a result, I've now got the back end of a cold. But this all stemmed from overload of stress. Yeah. If I'd had the incident on Sunday night, but not the gluten, would I have then got a cold?
Well, this brings the full thing of when you look at health from a holistic perspective, for us it makes total sense. But a lot of people will not make all the connection and then look at going, I must have been exposed to someone got a cold. or I must have caught it from somewhere. Whereas actually really all that's happened is that accumulation of those different stresses has had a knock-on effect onto your system.
Yep.
And so the system has prioritized what it needs to fight out most, which is going to be the gluten first of all. And then the immune system is now overloaded. So it can only cope with so much. And we're continually knocking off the cough, cold, flu viruses. Now the ability to keep those in check, all you need to do is, we're exposed to them all the time. Now the body now has to do a cold to re-establish balance. So the question always for a lot of people is like, are you ill, or is your body just giving you the feedback that it naturally needs to do for that cascade of events that you've been through, to slow you down, to allow you to rest, to recheck and then recover? Because the classic also will be, I'll take something, potion, lotion, remedy, whatever it is, so I can keep going.
Yep.
When that's when we get really ill. So we don't listen to the body. We go, and then we have a crisis.
Yeah, and it's always been this big thing, oh, it's just a cold, push through it. It used to frustrate me more and more. Even though I'm here now, if it had been Tuesday, I think, when it was the worst, I would have just cancelled my appointment. That when I worked in the corporate world, and one of my team would come in with a cold, and then suddenly like 5 or 6 of them would be having a cold, and they're on the phones in a call centre, and I'm like, this isn't really the best thing. Like, maybe you should just stay home. But like we see things show up in different ways: intolerances, stress, like physical and emotional stress, as we've spoken about today. Is that it's stress on our body.
Yeah, the number one thing is it's a maladaptation to stress, so the body has to go through a reaction to re-establish balance.
Yeah.
So it's going back to the whole thing of balance and homeostasis, and if the body is tilted else one way, it has to do other things to eventually regain that balance. So it is stresses, and then also the effects of stress on the body is inflammation.
Yep.
So the inflammation is what charges the immune system. So we've seen that classically with COVID, is that you've got a viral infection, exposure, a reaction of the body, which results in an inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response is really the body an attempt to try and deal with the virus, to try and get things in balance. So same with all those symptoms. The body's under threat. So in your case for gluten, unfortunately, it's the headache. For someone else, it will be bloating. It'll be irritable bowel symptoms.
Yep.
It may be constipation. It might be diarrhea. For other people, it can be joint ache. It can be, feel like an arthritic response.
But it doesn't have to be even just gluten, does it? It's a reaction to something which your system doesn't see as a thing that should be there. And
also that those it's not only just about that one, when it goes back to chemical, that one food stuff, because as we were saying earlier, it can also be that same food stuff from different parts of the world. So a classic example for me is that one of my food intolerance tests is yeast. Mm-hmm. But I can tolerate it. I don't have an allergic reaction. I probably wouldn't generally have an intolerance or a sensitivity, but I can cope with it. But it goes back to that threshold. But there must be something different in this country, or where it's produced, or the interaction with chemicals or something, because when I'm back in South Africa, I can tolerate everything. And so the other thing is that you get different slight species and different types of gluten, different types of wheat, so it gets very confusing. So some people go, well, I went away on holiday. They're relaxed, they're chilled out, and they don't have a problem, or they go away on holiday and say, I ate something and I reacted to, but they've been exposed to a different substrate or species, and suddenly they reacted. So it's also it's environment as well as exposure, and then the type of strain of something that you react to.
But look at being back home in South Africa, you're going to be exposed to more vitamin D.
Yeah, and so also you're away from home, you're more relaxed, you're enjoying yourself, so you're now consuming the same product. As long as it's not an allergic reaction, your immunoglobulin E, it's now you've been exposed to the same product.
So the IgG
the IgG response, but in a totally different environment.
Yeah.
So you might be sleeping a bit better, you're very relaxed, your stress levels are lower, so your level of tolerance is better. You can adapt to it better. But when you've had, like you had, the reaction, and then there's stress, and then something else, your level of tolerance, or your immune system's or nervous system's ability to cope with that is such short lines that you then react.
Yeah, because I didn't always be reactive to it, but it was before bodybuilding that I was fine with eating bread and stuff like that. And I think that I always joke with my wife. I joke with Laura that actually I used to eat gluten before I met you, but so did she.
I was just about to say that it's not uncommon for some people to have an emotional stress or an event or a trauma which kind of kickstarts and almost switches. So you're going back into genetics,
yep,
where you can switch. It's more common to switch on and off, but you can upregulate and switch on a certain genetic expression. So it can be smoldering the whole time, and then suddenly we go through a traumatic event which kind of pulls the trigger, and then it's switched on.
And that's where we look into like genetics. Like we can be genetically predisposed to certain diseases. Like someone could have cancer running in their family, heart disease, and usually what we see from generation to generation is that like every lifestyle is pretty similar. So like if our parents had this lifestyle, chances are we're going to lead this lifestyle in our children. And where genetics load the gun, but our environment pulls the trigger.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
As you say, like people are predisposed. So I see people that I work with, they're so fearful because their parents and their grandparents all died of heart disease or something. I'm certain to get it. Genetically predisposed, yes, but you have to then go through that lifestyle to pull that trigger.
And remember that with genes, there's 2 gene pools, but also there's some genes also have 2 or 3 SNPs, not just 1 or 2. So
and there's millions of genes as well.
And some are strong, some are weak. So it's a lot more complicated. But as a general sense, it's bounced around that approximately around 5% of your health expression is purely genetic, and then the rest is environmental. So it's why that person can be a 30-a-day smoker and doesn't get lung cancer, and someone else gets lung cancer and they never smoked, but they may be exposed to a different toxin or different stress and emotional stress. I've had patients who have had really a clean bill of health, and then suddenly bang, they've got a whole lot of health issues, and you go back, and I think the smoking gun for a lot of the times is emotional trauma events, where even at the time they tend to cope with them all right, and then they clear, but they've set off that chain of events of inflammation that we set off. So it doesn't always have to be food; it can be emotional. As well as physical trauma.
Well, that's one of the things that I work with clients. We do this full health screening where we go through health history. One of the things which is beneficial with people is that if you have like a 23andMe test and then get the raw data and put it into Genetic Genie, and there's not loads of genes, but there's like 12 or 13, like the MTHFR, COMT, VDR, and like MAOA. Just some of like the more common ones, but it goes through some of the genetic SNPs so you can see what's going on. As they're an overload of stress, they're not going to be able to process or like recycle their dopamine and neurotransmitters and stuff. But also looking at their brain health and saying about glia cells, like if we've been knocked out, if we've been hit around the head, and then suddenly like all you have to do then is that if you've primed things like your glia cells, the immune cells in the brain, they can't be unprimed. So all it takes is just to have an immune reaction to food or an argument with your partner, like for them to have like 4 or 5 days of depression and IBS symptoms, all that stuff. And I think one of the things that I used to get so frustrated by, because I used to suffer with migraines a lot. We've spoken about my dad having a stroke, and he used to have migraines, and that used to then, we had that genetic thing. My sister still gets migraines. When we got them, it was worse because we were worried about what had happened to my dad when he was 47. I think my brother gets migraines still. And the worrying bit we used to have was that we never knew what was causing them apart from stress. And I didn't link it with foods I was having. So therefore, the bloatedness that came afterwards as well, the migraine, the fatigue, it was happening over and over again, and that's the biggest frustration. Like, yeah, I knew Saturday I was going to be like feeling crap, so you know what to do. You chill out, you relax. Luckily, Monaco Grand Prix was on, although it wasn't a good result for Hamilton. But the qualifying and everything was all good. But because you know what's caused it, it's not as frustrating, because you know 3-4 days going to feel shit. Excuse the language, going to feel bad, and then you're going to be okay again. But if you don't know what's caused it, you aren't taking that stressor away.
And I think that's the key thing to finish up on, is that when you get the symptoms and you're dealing with, say, like migraines or irritable bowel, etc., it is important from a clinical perspective to deal with the crisis. But if there's a pattern, it's very much a case of going on a journey, because I bet you didn't figure all that out, very quickly. It is a case of, our starting point is always look at the environment and look at physical, emotional and chemical, and look at diet, look at stress levels, look at things. But it's very seldom, as you've described perfectly with the migraine and then the dog, and it's very seldom that it's one trigger. It's very seldom, because then you have say, well, the trigger is perfect. All I need to do is not eat this one food stuff, and then lo and behold, you get the headache, and you haven't eaten that, because there's usually other knock-on effects. It's about the latest real viewpoint of migraines is a wave of reaching a threshold in the nervous system, and then you almost hit a cascade of events. So if life is relaxed and you don't hit that event, you don't get the migraine. So you think, well, I ate that the other day and I was fine.
Yeah.
And then a week later you do the same, and then you get the headache, and it becomes even more complicated. So it is a case of going on a journey. Yes, you might need those crutch therapies to help you get over the crisis, but if you really truly want to have a good understanding, then it is. We don't necessarily encourage people to go straight into the genetic element, because it's such a small percentage. It's something eventually that people come to because they've now got this greater understanding, and they want even more and more. Though usually it is for us looking at that physical, emotional and chemical trauma. And as classic within functional medicine, it is usually a case of starting with the gut.
Yep.
Because that's pretty much our biggest interaction with all the chemicals and overload.
I think even going back even further, like we're starting to look at the repercussions in the gut, but your circadian rhythm and routine, like it's going to show up in the gut.
Yeah.
But then we go back, like what has actually caused it. I was then thinking then about, and this had come up as well, like we had the migraine based on gluten, but a couple of weeks ago when we'd done the podcast before, I had the shoulder problem that was going on with nerve things going on in the shoulder. So there's overload of stress there. Then the nerves firing in a different way. Add that to the gluten. Like, where does the actual chain reaction start? But when we look at going into genetics, so a lot of things we can actually sort within our body by just being consistent of sleep times, wake times, meal times. Yeah. But
don't you find that when you're helping clients, sometimes they, you do want to come in and do a lot of complicated tests and a lot of complicated things. You can throw a lot of money on different tests. But if you just get some of the basic principles down,
foundations.
As you say, the foundations, and that a lot of people, a huge percentage of chunk of things drop without having to go. And then you can go into more specifics in that, because people can throw a lot of information, a lot of money, and get a lot of information, but that can make you even more confused.
Yeah, I think it can add more stress as well, because like more confusion, you've spent more money on it. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. Like, what do I do? And I think, like, I would say, and like this is just a massive guess, that probably about 85%, maybe 90% of the people I work with can massively improve their health by just being consistent with their routine, including weekends.
It's classically the 80-20 rule, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're doing what you're doing 80% of the time is what you're going to reap the rewards, one way or the other.
Yeah.
You can certainly get, paralysis through analysis of getting even more confused, because you're trying to analyze everything. So we're available. We're about, if any of this touches information or anything that you want to expand on, through our various networks, get a hold of us. We're happy to here to support you or point you in the right directions.
As long as there's no kebabs involved.
As long as no kebabs and vet bills.
Or gluten.
The other thing to finish off on, a lot of people also then turn and say, well, then going into this extra mile and going into looking at all these things costs money. Especially in the UK with the NHS, it's a case of, well, I can go to the NHS, it's paid for, but private care and that is expensive, got to go look into. I always to finish off, you remind me of two things. How much was your vet bill, and how much does it cost to run your car? And when you look at things, so I the other day was looking into servicing my car, etc. And you look at it and go, wow. It's a lot of people turn around, but private care or looking into these things costs a lot of money. But when people do invest in themselves and they gain the rewards, it's worth far more than a lot compared to a lot of other things people spend money on.
I had a client today who was saying about it, and I work with clients on 3-month chunks, and he's come to the end of it, and he was like, it's time to like go on his own for a bit. He was like, it's a big investment at first, but I've actually I make more money now in my business because of it. And it's that first hurdle of jumping through, getting on board, getting the changes made, and then you look back and you see what has actually happened.
Yeah.
And then how much focus and all that other stuff.
And it's investment in yourself. It's investment in your understanding and going on a journey rather than just I pay X and then I get I get one product is the whole thing. Right. Podcast done. As always, unplugged because I had no idea where we were going with anything today.
I just wanted some sympathy. I got man flu.
Instead he got an adjustment. Right, have a great week, and we'll catch up for you next time on the
Unplugged. This is the
weekend.
We're gonna
have to change
you ready for the
Unplugged?
I just went straight in and said the podcast because I couldn't think which way around it was.
Right, have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Catch you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.